Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. The alarm on my wrist buzzed at 4:47 a.m., cutting through the thin veil of sleep I'd managed to find. 3 weeks into this nightmare, and I still couldn't get used to the silence. No traffic hum, no distant sirens, no neighbor's dog barking at shadows. Just the occasional crack of settling wood and the soft snores of the other survivors packed into the old warehouse that served as our temporary sanctuary. I'd been Haaland before all this, unemployed, desperate, sitting in a cramped office chair answering questions about my 5-year plan, when the first screams started echoing from the street below. Now I was just another scavenger in what the radio broadcasts called the Atlanta safe zone, though safe felt like a cruel joke most days. The warehouse complex sat on the outskirts of what used to be Marietta, far enough from the city center to avoid the worst of the infection, close enough that someone like me could make runs into the red zones for supplies. 312 of us had found our way here over the past weeks, led by a former Army sergeant named Joseph, who'd taken charge when the original group's leader got bit during a supply run. Joseph had the kind of steady voice that made you believe things might work out, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. I rolled off my thin mattress, careful not to wake Nico, who slept on a pile of blankets 3 feet away. The man had a nervous twitch that got worse when he was startled, and the last thing any of us needed was him jumping up and knocking over the metal shelving we used as room dividers. The concrete floor was cold against my bare feet, the October morning carrying that sharp bite that meant winter wasn't far behind. My gear lay where I'd left it the night before, a methodical arrangement born from weeks of dangerous routine. Military surplus backpack, checking every zipper and strap for wear, combat knife in its sheath, the weight familiar against my palm, compact binoculars that had belonged to some weekend hunter before the world ended, a small notebook where I sketched maps and recorded observations, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep it dry. Most important was the AR-15 rifle with its custom suppressor, a weapon I'd acquired from an abandoned police station during my second week. The silencer made it invaluable for eliminating infected without drawing others, though ammunition remained precious enough that every shot had to count. I dressed in layers, moisture-wicking shirt, fleece jacket, waterproof outer shell, dark colors that wouldn't stand out against urban decay, steel-toed boots with good tread, the kind that wouldn't slip on blood-slicked pavement, or announce my presence with squeaks and clicks. Every piece of clothing had been tested during previous runs, each item chosen for function over comfort. The warehouse complex had a small kitchen area where someone had managed to keep a camp stove running off propane tanks we'd scavenged from abandoned RVs. I heated water for instant coffee, the bitter taste a small comfort in the pre-dawn darkness. Joseph appeared as I was screwing the cap back onto my thermos, his graying hair standing at odd angles. "Where you headed today?" he asked, voice low to avoid waking the others. "Back to the subway entrance on Peachtree," I said. "Yesterday I saw something strange down there." Joseph raised an eyebrow. 3 weeks had taught us all to pay attention when someone reported unusual behavior from the infected. Strange how? They were gathered in the tunnel mouth, maybe 15 or 20 of them. But they weren't moving around like they usually do. Just standing there, almost like they were waiting for something. "Could be they got stuck," Joseph suggested. "Sometimes they cluster up in doorways or narrow spaces." I shook my head. This felt different. I want to get a closer look, maybe see if there's a pattern. Joseph studied my face in the dim light from the camp stove. "You sure you don't want backup? You know I work better alone, less chance of noise, less chance of drawing attention." It was true, though not the whole truth. Working alone meant I could move at my own pace, make decisions without having to coordinate with someone else. It also meant that if things went bad, I was the only one who'd pay the price. I'd learned that lesson during the job interview that had saved my life, when everyone else in that office building had either fled in panic or been torn apart in the stairwells. Joseph nodded slowly. Radio check every 2 hours. If I don't hear from you by 6 tonight, I'm sending a team. The walkie-talkie clipped to my belt was our lifeline, though its range was limited and the batteries wouldn't last forever. We'd found a cache of them in an abandoned security office. Along with the charging station, we ran off a car battery connected to solar panels on the warehouse roof. I finished my coffee and shouldered the backpack, adjusting the straps until the weight distributed evenly across my shoulders. 35 pounds of essential gear: water, energy bars, basic medical supplies, spare batteries, zip ties, and various tools for breaking into locked doors or containers. The AR-15 hung across my chest in a tactical sling, suppressor attached and safety engaged. I'd learned to carry it in a position where I could bring it to bear quickly, but without the barrel catching on doorways or debris. Heavy enough to be useful, light enough that I could still move quickly when necessary. The warehouse complex's main entrance faced away from the city, opening onto a gravel road that connected to the highway system. I slipped out through a side door that had been reinforced with metal plates, making sure the lock caught behind me. Dawn was still an hour away, but the eastern horizon showed the faintest hint of gray against the star-filled sky. The walk to Atlanta's outskirts took me through abandoned subdivisions where neat rows of houses stood like tombstones in the dim light. Some had broken windows or doors hanging off their hinges, evidence of hasty evacuations or desperate searches for supplies. Others looked untouched, as if their owners had simply vanished. I'd learned not to investigate too closely. Houses that looked empty often weren't, and the infected had a talent for appearing when you least expected them. I moved at a steady pace, boots crunching softly on fallen leaves. The autumn air carried scents of wood smoke and decay, though the source of either could be miles away. Smoke meant fire, which could mean survivors, or simply the result of electrical systems failing in empty buildings. Decay was everywhere now, garbage that would never be collected. Food spoiling in powerless refrigerators, and worse things I tried not to think about. The radio crackled softly as I reached the first major intersection. Base to runner, radio check. Runner to base, all clear. Entering the outer suburbs now. Copy that. Weather report says rain this afternoon, so watch your footing. Rain would make everything harder. Limited visibility, slippery surfaces, and the infected seemed more active when the barometric pressure dropped. But it would also mask sounds and scents, giving me better cover for moving through dangerous areas. The suburbs gave way to strip malls and office complexes, the commercial sprawl that surrounded every major city. Most of the parking lots were empty, except for abandoned vehicles, their doors often left open by owners who'd fled on foot when traffic stopped moving. I'd learned to approach cars carefully. Sometimes the infected got trapped inside, and they'd explode into motion the moment a door opened. A grocery store caught my attention, its windows dark but intact. Worth noting for a future supply run, though the odds of finding anything useful after 3 weeks were slim. The first wave of looting had cleared most stores within hours of the initial outbreak, and subsequent scavengers had picked over what remained. I was approaching the city proper when I heard the first sounds of movement ahead. Shuffling footsteps, the occasional grunt or wheeze that marked the infected. I crouched behind an overturned delivery truck and pulled out my binoculars, scanning the street ahead. 3 of them wandered aimlessly through an intersection about 200 yards away. A woman in what had been a business suit, now stained dark with dried blood. An elderly man dragging one leg behind him, his left arm hanging at an impossible angle. A teenager whose face was partially missing, revealing bone and cartilage beneath. They moved without purpose or coordination, bumping into each other in abandoned cars with equal indifference. This was normal behavior, the mindless wandering that had become humanity's replacement in most urban areas. What I'd seen yesterday at the subway entrance had been different, and that difference had been eating at me all night. I waited until they shuffled out of sight, then continued toward the city center. One stumbled closer than I'd anticipated, emerging from behind a delivery truck about 50 yards ahead. Female, business attire, left arm dangling uselessly. I dropped to one knee and shouldered the AR-15, lining up the shot through the scope. The suppressed round took her in the forehead with a soft thump, dropping her instantly. The sound was barely louder than a book falling to the floor, quiet enough that her two companions continued their aimless wandering without notice. The buildings grew taller, their windows reflecting the gray morning sky like dead eyes. Many showed signs of fire damage, black smears above broken windows where flames had licked upward, or entire floors that looked like charcoal. The fire department had stopped responding to calls during the first week, and after that, fires had burned until they ran out of fuel or met a fire break. The subway entrance appeared ahead, a concrete stairway descending into darkness beneath a blue and white transit authority sign. Yesterday I'd approached from the north and seen the cluster of infected gathered at the tunnel mouth, motionless as statues. Today I was coming from the east, which would give me a different angle and hopefully more information. I positioned myself behind a burned-out newsstand about 50 yards from the entrance and raised my binoculars. The scene below made my breath catch in my throat. There were more of them today. At least 30 infected crowded into the space where the stairway met the tunnel entrance. But they weren't moving, not wandering, not swaying, not even shifting their weight from foot to foot. They stood perfectly still, faces pointed deeper into the tunnel as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The sight violated everything I'd learned about the infected over the past 3 weeks. They were driven by basic instincts, hunger, the urge to follow sounds or movement, simple responses to stimuli. They didn't gather purposefully, didn't stand still unless something was physically blocking their movement. Yet here they were, clustered together like commuters waiting for a train that would never come. I lowered the binoculars and checked my watch. 7:23 a.m. I needed to get closer, but the approach would be tricky. The subway entrance sat in the middle of a small plaza surrounded by office buildings, with very little cover between my position and the stairs. If the infected below were actually aware of their surroundings, I'd be visible long before I could retreat to safety. The radio whispered against my belt. "Base to runner, radio check." I kept my voice barely above a whisper. "Runner to base. At the target location. Situation is unusual. Need time to observe." "Copy that. Stay safe out there." I spent the next hour watching the infected through my binoculars, looking for any sign of movement or change in behavior. A few times I thought I saw subtle shifts, a head turning slightly, shoulders adjusting position, but it might have been my imagination or the effect of staring too long at motionless figures. The sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows into the subway entrance. Still, the infected remained motionless, and still I couldn't shake the feeling that I was witnessing something fundamentally different from anything I'd seen before. I had to get closer. The notebook in my backpack already contained detailed maps of the subway system, copied from transit authority posters during previous scouting runs. There was a service entrance 3 blocks north that connected to the same tunnel system. If I could approach from underground, I might be able to observe without being detected. The decision felt simultaneously necessary and insane, but 3 weeks of survival had taught me to trust my instincts, even when they led me into danger. Whatever was happening down there, Yosef and the others needed to know about it. I backed away from the newsstand and began working my way toward the service entrance, keeping to shadows and moving with the careful patience that kept people alive in the red zones. The infected below continued their vigil, and somewhere in the darkness beyond them, something was waiting. The service entrance sat beneath a concrete overhang between 2 office buildings, marked only by a faded transit authority logo and a heavy steel door that had been painted over so many times, the original color was anyone's guess. I'd found it during my first week of scouting, back when I was still learning which areas were worth the risk and which were death traps waiting to spring. I crouched behind a rusted dumpster and scanned the area through my binoculars. The street was empty except for scattered debris and a few abandoned cars, their doors hanging open like broken wings. No movement, no sounds except the distant whisper of wind through broken windows. The morning sun cast long shadows that could hide threats, but I'd learned to read the subtle differences between shadow and danger. The lock on the service door had been cut weeks ago, my own handiwork during a previous expedition. I slipped inside, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness before moving deeper into the maintenance corridor. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and rust, overlaid with something sweeter that made my stomach turn. Decay had a way of seeping into everything down here. My boots splashed quietly through shallow puddles as I navigated the narrow passage. Emergency lighting strips along the walls flickered sporadically, powered by backup systems that were slowly failing. The corridor connected to the main tunnel system about 200 yards from the Peachtree entrance, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid immediate detection. The AR-15 felt reassuring in my hands as I approached the junction point. I'd modified the weapon myself, adding a tactical light beneath the barrel and wrapping the stock with paracord for better grip. The suppressor was a custom job, machined by someone in the safe zone who'd worked in a machine shop before the world ended. It wouldn't make the rifle completely silent, but it reduced the sound signature enough that infected beyond 30 yards rarely noticed. I reached the maintenance platform that overlooked the main tunnel and immediately understood why the infected had gathered here. The tunnel curved gently to the left, creating a natural bottleneck that funneled foot traffic from multiple entrance points. But what I saw below defied everything I thought I knew about their behavior. 43 infected stood in perfect stillness, arranged in rough clusters throughout the tunnel space. Men, women, children, a cross-section of Atlanta's population frozen in time. They faced deeper into the tunnel system, their heads tilted at identical angles as if listening to a sound I couldn't hear. Some still wore the clothes they'd died in, business suits, hospital scrubs, a wedding dress stained dark with dried blood. I pulled out my notebook and began sketching the scene, noting positions and groupings. The infected closest to the platform were 3 adults, a man in construction gear, a teenage girl in a school uniform, and an elderly woman clutching a purse. All stood within arm's reach of each other, but showed no awareness of their proximity. Their eyes were open but vacant, milky with the film that covered all the infected. For 20 minutes I observed and recorded, watching for any sign of movement or change. Occasionally one would shift slightly, a barely perceptible adjustment of posture, but they remained essentially motionless. It was like watching mannequins in a department store window, except these mannequins had once been living, breathing people. The radio crackled softly against my belt. "Base to runner." "Radio check." I whispered my response, though the infected below showed no reaction to the sound. "Runner to base, I'm in position. Situation is even stranger than yesterday. I count over 40 infected in a single location, all motionless." "Copy that." "Any signs of aggressive behavior?" "Negative. They're just standing there, like they're waiting for something." "Understood. Maintain observation and report any changes." I clipped the radio back to my belt and continued watching. The tunnel system extended in both directions beyond my line of sight, disappearing into darkness that my tactical light couldn't penetrate. According to my maps, the main line continued for several miles underground, connecting to multiple stations throughout the city. If this behavior was widespread, it could mean thousands of infected were gathering in the subway system. Movement caught my attention, subtle but unmistakable. The man in construction gear had turned his head slightly, just a few degrees to the left. Then the teenage girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Small movements, barely noticeable, but definitely coordinated. They were responding to something. I strained to hear what might be causing the subtle movements. The tunnel acoustics amplified every sound, from the drip of water somewhere in the darkness to the distant rumble of settling concrete. The infected began shifting slightly, barely perceptible adjustments in their stance. The man in construction gear swayed almost imperceptibly. The elderly woman with the purse shifted her weight. The teenage girl's head tilted a fraction of an inch to one side. I documented each movement, noting the time and sequence. The behavior was strange, but I couldn't identify any clear pattern or purpose. Whatever was causing them to gather here remained a mystery. Then I made my mistake. While leaning forward to get a better angle for my sketches, my boot caught on a loose piece of metal grating. The sound was sharp and metallic, echoing off the tunnel walls like a gunshot. I froze, hoping the noise would fade without consequence. Every infected head snapped toward my position in perfect unison. 43 pairs of dead eyes locked onto the maintenance platform where I crouched. For a heartbeat, the tunnel was absolutely silent. Then they exploded into motion. The infected surged toward the platform like a wave, their mouths opening in wet snarls as they clawed at the concrete walls. The construction worker reached the base of the platform first, finding handholds in the rough concrete and climbing with desperate hunger. I put a suppressed round through his skull, dropping him back into the mass below, but more were already scrambling over his body. The tactical light illuminated faces twisted with hunger, the same mindless drive I'd seen in every infected encounter. They clawed at the platform edge, some falling back into the crowd while others pressed forward with relentless determination. Bodies piled against the concrete as more infected pushed from behind. I fired 3 more shots, precise headshots that dropped infected with mechanical efficiency. The platform was only 8 feet above the tunnel floor, and the sheer number of bodies was creating a rising pile that brought them closer to my level. The infected climbed over their fallen companions without awareness or hesitation. "Runner to base. I've got a situation." I spoke into the radio while backing toward the maintenance corridor. "The infected are active and aggressive, multiple hostiles converging on my position." "Copy that, Runner. Can you extract?" "Working on it." I reached the corridor entrance as hands grabbed the platform edge above me. The teenage girl hauled herself up with strength that defied her slight frame, dark fluid dripping from her mouth. I put a round through her forehead, but 2 more infected were already following her up. The narrow corridor became a killing funnel as I retreated, firing single shots at pursuing infected. The suppressor kept the noise manageable, but I was burning through ammunition faster than I'd planned. Each round had to count. Headshots only, as body shots merely slowed them without stopping their advance. The elderly woman with the purse stumbled into the corridor entrance, her movements the same shambling gait I'd observed from all infected. Behind her, more pressed forward, their numbers creating a bottleneck that temporarily slowed their advance. I used the momentary respite to check my remaining ammunition. 18 rounds left in the magazine. 2 spare magazines in my pack. The maintenance corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by failing emergency strips. Side passages branched off at irregular intervals, some leading to electrical rooms, and others connecting to different parts of the tunnel system. I'd mapped most of them during previous expeditions, but in the darkness and under pressure, it was easy to take a wrong turn into a dead end. I moved deeper into the corridor, the infected following with relentless determination. Their footsteps splashed through puddles, creating a rhythmic percussion that masked my own movement. The sound bounced off the walls in confusing echoes, making it difficult to judge their exact distance behind me. A junction appeared ahead, 3 passages leading in different directions. The left passage connected to a utility room I'd cleared during my first week. The center passage led to another platform overlooking a different section of tunnel. The right passage was unknown territory, marked on my map with a question mark. I chose the center passage, hoping to gain elevation and visual advantage. The infected poured into the junction behind me, some taking wrong turns while others continued following the sound of my movement through the echoing corridors. The second platform was smaller than the first, barely large enough for 2 people. It overlooked a section of tunnel that curved sharply to the right, limiting visibility but also providing cover. I positioned myself at the platform edge and waited for the first infected to emerge from the corridor. The elderly woman appeared first, moving with the same unsteady gait I'd grown accustomed to. I dropped her with a headshot, then shifted targets to the man in hospital scrubs who followed. Behind him, more infected pressed forward, stepping over the bodies with typical indifference to obstacles. The sheer number of infected was the real problem. They moved with the same shambling determination I'd seen from individual infected, but concentrated in such density that they became a relentless tide of bodies. When one fell, another immediately took its place, driven by the same mindless hunger that motivated them all. I fired systematically, conserving ammunition while maximizing effect. Headshots at close range, minimal movement to avoid drawing more attention. The suppressor worked perfectly, reducing each shot to a sharp whisper that didn't carry beyond the immediate area. But they kept coming. The corridor funneled them toward my position in a steady stream, each infected driven by the basic instinct to reach the source of noise and movement. The businessman replaced the teenage girl. Then came a nurse whose scrubs were stained with dark fluids. My ammunition was running low, 8 rounds left in the current magazine. I needed to move before they overwhelmed my position through sheer numbers. The platform had no rear exit. Retreat meant going through or around the infected blocking the corridor. I pulled a fragmentation grenade from my pack, a last resort I'd been saving for exactly this kind of situation. The blast would clear the corridor but also announce my presence to every infected within a mile radius. In the confined space of the tunnel system, it would be like ringing a dinner bell. Runner to base, I'm about to go loud. Stand by for possible activity increase in your area. Understood, Runner. We're tracking multiple movement signatures heading toward the city. Whatever you did down there, it's attracting attention. I pulled the pin and counted to 3 before rolling the grenade down the corridor. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, a sharp crack followed by the rumble of collapsing concrete. Emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging the tunnel into darkness broken only by my tactical light. Smoke and dust filled the corridor, along with the acrid smell of high explosives. I waited 30 seconds for the debris to settle, then moved toward the blast site with the AR-15 ready. Bodies lay scattered among chunks of concrete and twisted metal, but I could hear movement beyond the cave-in. The explosion had partially collapsed the corridor, creating a barrier of rubble that would slow but not stop determined pursuit. I could hear scratching and scraping from the other side as infected worked to clear the obstruction. It would buy me time, but not much. I backtracked to the junction and took the left passage toward the utility room. This route would eventually connect to the surface through a different exit, several blocks from my entry point. The infected would likely spread out to search multiple routes, dividing their numbers and reducing the immediate threat. The utility room was exactly as I'd left it, empty except for electrical panels and maintenance equipment. A ladder led to a street-level access hatch that opened near a parking garage. I climbed carefully, listening for sounds of movement above. The hatch opened onto an alley behind the garage, shielded from view by dumpsters and abandoned vehicles. I emerged cautiously, scanning for threats before fully committing to surface travel. The area appeared clear, but infected could be anywhere. In buildings, vehicles, or simply standing motionless until triggered into action. I made my way back toward the safe zone, taking a circuitous route that avoided main streets and potential choke points. The AR-15 was slung across my chest again, easily accessible but not openly threatening to any survivors who might be watching from concealed positions. The radio crackled as I reached the suburban area. Runner to base, I'm clear of the immediate threat zone, returning to base with critical intelligence. Copy that, Runner. We've got teams standing by for debrief. What's your ETA? 30 minutes if the route stays clear. Understood. Joseph wants a full report as soon as you arrive. I picked up my pace, eager to share what I'd learned with the rest of the safe zone. The infected weren't just wandering aimlessly. They were gathering in large numbers in confined spaces, though I had no idea why. That concentration made them incredibly dangerous when disturbed, but it also meant they were removing themselves from street-level areas. Behind me, smoke still rose from the subway entrance where my grenade had detonated. The infected would eventually disperse or resume whatever had drawn them there in the first place. But now I had witnessed something that could change our understanding of their behavior patterns. The warehouse complex appeared ahead, its familiar silhouette a welcome sight after the chaos underground. Guards waved me through the perimeter checkpoint, their faces showing relief at my safe return. Joseph would want to hear everything, and then we'd have to decide what this new intelligence meant for our survival strategy. The infected were gathering in unprecedented numbers, concentrating themselves in underground locations. The implications of this behavior were unclear, but the tactical reality was simple. Disturbing these concentrations resulted in immediate and overwhelming retaliation from dozens of infected at once. The warehouse complex buzzed with activity as I approached the main building. Guards nodded at familiar faces while scanning the horizon for threats. The afternoon sun cast long shadows. and I could smell wood smoke from cooking fires mixed with the metallic scent of weapons being cleaned. Inside, the command center occupied the old manager's office. Maps covered every wall, street layouts, building schematics, supply routes marked in colored ink. Joseph stood behind a metal desk with his core team. Nora, a former police captain handling security. Bradley, an engineer maintaining power and water systems, and Dr. Kim, our medical officer. Hayland. Joseph looked up from a subway system map. Good to see you back. Nora said you had interesting radio traffic. I set my pack down and pulled out the notebook, opening to my maintenance platform sketches. Sir, what I observed changes our understanding of infected behavior patterns. We need to discuss immediate tactical implications. The room fell quiet as I spread drawings across the desk. Joseph studied the sketches, crude but accurate representations of infected clusters underground. Talk me through it, he said. 43 infected gathered in a single tunnel section, motionless for extended periods. They stood in loose clusters, facing deeper into the system, showing no awareness of surroundings. I pointed to specific figures. When I made noise, they responded instantly and aggressively, all of them simultaneously. Dr. Kim examined the sketches. How long were they stationary? At least 20 minutes of observation, possibly hours based on yesterday's sighting. Nora crossed her arms grimly. How many did you engage? 7 confirmed kills before using explosive ordnance to extract. 36 remained active when I left. Joseph traced routes on the map. This tunnel connects to how many stations? 12 major stations, dozens of smaller platforms. If this behavior is widespread, we could be looking at thousands concentrated underground. Bradley spoke up. That explains our observations. Street-level encounters decreased 60% this past week. They're congregating, Dr. Kim said. But why? I shook my head. Couldn't determine a cause. No obvious stimuli. They just gather. Joseph studied the maps while we waited. As leader, he balanced immediate safety against long-term survival for over 300 lives. This changes our expansion timeline, he said. We plan to extend the perimeter toward downtown, establish observation posts, reclaim commercial districts, with major concentrations underground. Concentrated targets are easier to handle, Nora interrupted. We know where they are. But more dangerous when disturbed, I said. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dr. Kim tapped her pen. Large concentrations increase viral mutation risk. We need elimination before they become a larger problem. Fire would be most effective. Contained spaces, limited oxygen, organic fuel load. Bradley looked uncomfortable. Setting subway fires isn't straightforward. Ventilation systems, electrical hazards, structural damage. But doable, Nora said. Incendiary devices, coordinated deployment, proper extraction. I presented tactical reality. Any tunnel operation carries extreme risk. Response to noise was instantaneous. Teams would be exposed during setup and ignition. Joseph walked to the window. Outside, children played while adults worked maintenance. How many teams needed? He asked. Nora consulted notes. 4 teams of 6 each. Combat engineers, infantry, medics. 24 people, Joseph said quietly. Plus support teams, Bradley added. 40 personnel total. Silence. 40 people meant 10% of our population. Losing even a few would be catastrophic. Dr. Kim broke silence. Alternative is thousands of infected concentrated near our location. If they disperse to street level, we'd be overrun, Nora finished. Joseph returned to the desk. Hayland, can it be done? I studied layouts, identifying choke points. With proper planning, yes, but casualties are inevitable. Multiple concentrations mean responses throughout connected networks. Timeline? 72 hours minimum. Fabricate devices, map deployment sites, establish protocols. Joseph met everyone's eyes. Not my decision alone. General Assembly, present intelligence, let the community decide. 2 hours later, The population gathered in the main warehouse. Joseph stood on a platform while I presented findings using enlarged sketches and maps. The crowd listened in tense silence as I described concentrations and aggressive responses. Joseph took the floor. Tactical situation is clear. Continue current operations accepting migration risk, or eliminate concentrations accepting casualty risk. Questions came rapidly. Parents worried about vulnerable children. Engineers questioned infrastructure damage. Dr. Mag, managing educational programs, asked, "What happens if we do nothing?" Joseph responded directly. Concentrations represent existential threat. If they migrate to street level in groups, our defenses would be overwhelmed. Frank, a former city planner, raised his hand. If the operation fails, worst case, lose combat personnel and face the same threat with reduced capacity. Debate continued an hour. Finally voting. 58% favored immediate action. Preparation began at dawn. Nora organized teams by experience. Bradley fabricated incendiary devices using gasoline, soap flakes, and kitchen timers. Dr. Kim prepared medical stations. I mapped routes and fallback positions. Each team needed multiple extraction paths if primaries became compromised. Teams assembled the third morning. 24 volunteers, our most capable people. Among them, Nesha, former EMT and best medic, Jack, ex-military demolitions, Lisi, police detective. Joseph addressed teams before departure. Deploy devices at designated locations and extract. Gather intelligence on distribution. If compromised, abort immediately. Teams departed 15 minutes apart using different entries. I accompanied Team Alpha through my service entrance as route guide. The operation began smoothly. Teams 1 and 2 reported successful device placement at their assigned locations, with minimal infected contact during approach phases. Team 3 encountered moderate resistance but completed their mission with one minor injury. Then, everything went wrong. The radio crackled with urgent traffic from Team 4. "Base, this is Team 4 leader. We've got major movement throughout the tunnel system. Infected are pouring out of side passages, way more than intelligence estimates." Team 4, can you extract to your secondary route? Negative. Secondary route is compromised. We're trapped in Maintenance Bay 7 with at least 50 infected surrounding our position. I grabbed the radio from our team leader. Team 4, this is Hayland. Maintenance Bay 7 connects to the service tunnel network through a utility access on the north wall. Emergency lighting should show you the panel. Copy that. We're moving. But Team 4 never made it to the utility access. Their radio went silent after a burst of gunfire and unintelligible shouting. Nora coordinated rescue attempts, but Teams 1 and 2 reported massive infected movement, blocking all access routes to Team 4's last known position. The incendiary devices detonated on schedule, creating massive fires that consumed oxygen and organic matter throughout major tunnel sections. Smoke poured from subway entrances across the city, as thousands of infected burned in the underground conflagration. But the cost was devastating. Team 4, 6 people, lost completely. Teams 2 and 3 suffered casualties during extraction. Jack died from blood loss after an infected severed his femoral artery, and Nesha sustained injuries that ended her effectiveness as a medic. In total, 8 killed and 5 seriously wounded. Nearly 30% casualties among our most capable personnel. The infected concentrations were eliminated, but our expansion plans died with them. Instead of reclaiming territory and growing our safe zone, we faced the reality of operating with significantly reduced capabilities. Joseph called another assembly that evening, announcing casualty figures and changed circumstances. "The infected concentrations are gone," he said. "Subway system clear, thousands eliminated. But expansion into red zones carries costs we may not be able to sustain." Dr. Kim provided medical assessment. "With reduced staff and increased injuries, we focus on current operations rather than expansion. Future missions must be limited in scope." Bradley's report was sobering. "Fire damage affects expansion plans. Without subway transportation, expansion becomes exponentially more difficult. Nora summarized tactical reality. Operating at 70% combat capability. Defensive operations feasible. Offensive operations suspended. I addressed the assembly. Intelligence proved accurate. Unprecedented concentrations posed significant threat. Operation eliminated threat but demonstrated our resource limits. Joseph redefined strategic goals. Shift from expansion to consolidation. Focus on maintaining positions, developing renewable resources, establishing communication with other communities. Community accepted this reality with stoic determination, adapting routines to cover casualties' responsibilities. But the dream of reclaiming Atlanta died in those tunnels with our friends. We eliminated immediate threat and learned valuable lessons, but discovered harsh limits of small community capabilities in a world overrun by the dead. 3 weeks later, preparing another solo mission, I reflected on aftermath. Concentrations gone, threat eliminated. But Atlanta remained red zone, empty streets and burned buildings, monuments to fallen civilization. We were survivors, not conquerors. The city belonged to the dead, our safety island remaining small, defensive, focused on survival in a world beyond human control.